5/7/2024. That is Autohoaxology by Symbia. I put a link to the track below. Latest track. It's also in the newsletter. So you want to subscribe there, go to ips.monster or join at patreon.com/infiniteplanesociety. We are joined by Elephant Tusks, who says we are joined by Elephant Tusks. And 737, Portal Complex, Nick Fingar. Immortal AI says, good show earlier. Yes, we were earlier today. It was myself and Fakeologist. We didn't have any callers, and we thought there were going to be hundreds because I'm open to debating anything, and apparently, cloud shouting is a big thing over there in Fakeoville still, in some parts, and none of them called in, and that's because I stipulated that I wouldn't talk to any chemtrail enthusiasts who aren't bringing their own evidence. So no one had it. We talked about lots of other things: fakeability, mis and disinformation, and essentially mass media mind control, and our various perspectives on it. But I'm going to upload that separately later. All right, joined by T. Ross, Ollie Goering. Lesko says, don't be a death clinger or corpse clutcher, Jungle Jim, and Messianic Charlatan. All right, we have about, let me get a new count. Earlier it was like 160 people between the video and audio streams. We'll let a few more people show up, and phones are now officially open. Numbers on the screen: 563-999-3664. And I'd like to catch up on a lot of things we didn't get to yesterday. One of the things we talked about was, this was earlier today, I mentioned von Braun, and how supposedly on his deathbed he wanted to warn the world about what was to come, and he told his secretary something about a fake alien invasion being the last Illuminati playing card the government would use. But it also included something about, here we go, this is from Cora. In 1974, shortly before dying, von Braun told associate Dr. Carol Rawson that the Pentagon would use the quote alien threat as the last ploy of their five-step program to arm space. Others were communist threat, terrorist threat, rogue nations, asteroid, and alien threat. He goes on here to say, note that most of the steps that follow the accomplished military schemes over the last 60-odd years for increased funding. Anyway, this is obviously coming from the perspective of somebody who believes that these things are plausible. I'm not really interested in following that Project Bluebeam thing in circles, although we did talk about that today with Fakeologists, that the idea of Project Bluebeam is simply that you would run a psyop that would visually trick everybody, something projected onto the sky. But you don't need that now that everyone has a screen pressed up against their face, and they're getting better and better at it. Nick Fingar says she said von Braun told her many times. Okay, he also warned about communism and radical Islam. I saw the communism, I saw terrorists, I guess that's Islam, which obviously I don't believe. I think the radical Islamic threat is a manufactured caricature, sort of like the MAGA ban. I mean, there are definitely people who embody this, but as far as the big attacks, these are all fake and staged. Okay, yesterday we talked about this. It's kind of a miracle. I'm thinking about geotagging it tomorrow. There's a certain Walmart parking lot here in Albuquerque where, if you look at the pavement, right there in the tar, you have a perfect silhouette, a perfect contour of Donald Trump. Hair, nose, lips, chin, it's all there. I took a short video of it, I posted it, and everybody's like, I can see it. So this isn't pareidolia. This isn't my imagination. There is objectively the face of Donald Trump in the parking lot. So I'll make it a point tomorrow to go over there. I just want to, source my claims. That's not something I made with AI art, because you can use some of these AI generators, and you give it a picture, and it'll make it look like it's something that's naturally occurring as an optical illusion. But no, this is real. All right, let's add on to something we talked about yesterday. We were talking about Dave Murphy and Dave Weiss both being false witnesses to 9/11. And here's something that was dug up by Lean Dion. And this is Dave Murphy. After a layoff, I turned down a job on the 40th floor, Tower 1, World Trade Center, took a job across the Hudson in Hoboken, New Jersey, and watched in disbelief the events of 9/11 at close range. Nobody can really say that. This is such a story, and I'm just pointing it out that if somebody lied about a psyop that many years ago, then there's a reason for it. They're insiders to the big movie production, and everything that you see following should be questionable. And we point this out because these are individuals who get quite a lot of mainstream media coverage when it comes to this conspiracy theory realm. It's like, what are they? It's like these are people that they've already pre-selected to interview to control what I believe it's hoax management is the term that fakeologists use. The controlled opposition agents are there for hoax management to control how we interpret things. All right, so I have a list of comments here I'm going to go through from the video IPS Morning Deprogram. Complete Conscious Production said, add John Singleton to the list of producers and directors for the LA riots. Allegedly, John Singleton wrote and directed the majority of LA Hood movies, including music videos, starting with Boys in the Hood. He introduced the rest of the world to the connection with LA gangs and the fascination of the Hood lifestyle in LA gangs. Yeah, I'm familiar with John Singleton, and this is a follow-up to what I had suggested about James Cameron and his proximity to the Rodney King beating footage, which triggered the LA riots. And we're talking about this in context of a new movie coming out soon called LA 1992, which will be about these riots. And last year, with the beating of Terry Nichols, we had the Rodney King beating brought back into our awareness because it was so comparable. It was templated off of it, but the comparisons were made. Anyway, commenter goes on to say, his movie Poetic Justice, starring Tupac and Janet Jackson, starts out by the camera in a panoramic view of the aftermath of the riots. The movie's plot had nothing to do with the riots. Also, there have been 7 actors who have died who've played in Boys in the Hood. This includes a sacrificial death inside a prison. The body was found inside of the painted pentagon of the victim's blood. Singleton died 4/28/19, age 51. Yeah, he died shortly after the Nipsey Hussle psyop, that the death, the marathon-length funeral where the hearse was driven 26 miles. We need to go back and revisit that entire event. But a number of us had suggested that he had also directed that staged, hoaxed death. And if you recall, there were more individuals who witnessed it. Like more of the interviews were coming from TMZ than the LAPD. Like the police hardly interviewed anybody. And the footage that was released that showed Nipsey Hussle's death was from some closed-circuit television nearby. And it's just questionable when you get into, how was this released, who filmed it. That whole event was just questionable. But yeah, I would say John Singleton stood out at that time. Erica Creech says, regarding Don't Look Up, the movie, at the end of the day, they gather together in love and gratitude like the Titanic scene where the mother in steerage tucks her kids to bed. Interesting point. Lesko says auto-hoaxology is great. The World is Rigged says, not a fan of Witsit, but what would be the reason for the government pretending to manipulate the weather? Are you saying that only people that would believe in weather manipulation are people who don't understand what contrails are? That's not true. Why would the government pretend to manipulate the weather? So they can tax you? So they can, I guess, regulate? Perhaps even take control over you personally, regulate the number of steps you can take per day, call you a carbon super spreader, demonize freedom and capitalism itself. I mean, there are a host of reasons why they would pretend that mankind is manipulating the weather. They call it climate change. Unless you're not on the left, in which you blame it on secret government programs and you believe the exact same thing. And I'm making the point that chemtrailers and climate change believers are the same people. They just have a different scapegoat. Anyway, I have a number of chemtrail enthusiasts pushing back. The World is Rigged says, maybe this answers my question from the other video. Are you attempting to strawman the argument that says, by saying, anyone who believes in chemtrails thinks the government is spraying the sky to make us sick? That's not a straw man, that's your conspiracy theory. When you accurately describe what they're maintaining to be true, they say you're misrepresenting us. They're so slippery. Chemtrail believers have no evidence, so they resort to sophistry, where they say, well, define your terms. What do you mean by this? And define it explicitly and don't straw man. It's like you're talking about what's coming out of planes and you're the one asserting this crazy stuff. Anyway, it's a dead conspiracy theory. It's deader than the Mandela effect, but it has its enthusiasts. They should just gather once a year, an annual chemtrail enthusiast convention, and they all, ironically, with no self awareness, fly to the city where they all meet. Like they all get on airplanes. David Hazel 3653 says, "Thank you, Tim. You helped me drop my belief in chemtrails a few months ago. Life has been a little less stressful now that I do not concern myself with those trails above my head." Yeah, just don't fall for the space junk stuff. Don't wear a space junk helmet either. I mean, I'm just reducing the amount of stress in your life. That's really what we're doing here. This is mind war inoculation. The war is the default position, the mind war, the psychological warfare. You have to deliberately opt out of it. And if you're a truther, you're hit with all kinds of scary scenarios. I see these memes that truthers post, and it's like, now that I'm awake, everything here is poison. And it's just a photo of a convenience store. Like, you didn't level up in life if you're suddenly afraid of Cheetos and cirrus clouds and 5G towers. You didn't wake up. You fell for some secular counterparts to some older superstitions about, sin and, I guess, for the most part, alternative God constructs. Because we live in a world populated with God constructs. I contend that the atomic bomb is just a war god, that the believers in it are so terrified of it that they will actually duck and cover under their desks. Then you have the earth god, who's really mad about us using up her resources, and if we don't stop, we don't tithe to the priesthood, she will raise the ocean levels and flood us. I mean, these are God constructs, and I reject them all. Cunife said, "Some years ago, I contacted the fire department where urine drinking Dave supposedly worked, but they never answered my email." Rocco Calzone says, "One vivid imagination on that last caller, ISS apologist." Yeah, we have some people who are really fighting to defend the honor of the ISS and NASA. Why would they lie? But you have to jump through hoops mentally to explain a space station if you're going to contend that it's within the Earth's atmosphere. There are just problems with aerodynamics. Okay, another longer comment here. Me and my drone says, "I used to work at AAA headquarters in Costa Mesa, California. The third floor was cartography, but no one could get off on that floor without a code. It was very strange. I was there at the building for 2 years and never saw or knew a cartographer or rode in the elevator with anybody going to the third floor. I know this is not proof of the flat Earth, but it's extremely strange." Kind of like the movie The 13th Floor. That is kind of ominous. He says, "On a side note, I've been alive for over 50 years and I've never met a cartographer or knew anyone who even knew one, let alone knew what cartography is." And that's bouncing off of what we were saying yesterday about how if you don't trust the media, if you don't trust the history, why would you still have the default position that you can trust all of the maps? We don't trust them when they tell us what's in deep space. I mean, unless you're gullible and a mainstreamer, you're like, yeah, that looks like a star 42 trillion light years away, but we're like, no, that looks like salami superimposed over a backdrop of stars, and we were correct. Anyway, we were talking about this and many other things yesterday. I want to get back into the notes I didn't get to yesterday. Elephant Tusk says, "Have you ever looked into the old 80s horror films like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, for occult references?" Oh yeah, Halloween had some references a couple of years ago. It had to do with the symbolism of William Shatner interestingly enough, because Halloween has Michael Myers, the killer with the knife man, who is played by, well, he's not played by William Shatner, but the killer wears a William Shatner mask. So you have this William Shatner knife man, and this correlated with William Shatner Rocket Man, because this was in October when Shatner was about to rocket up to space. So it had us looking at the symbolism of the Halloween movies, and there is some stuff there, some runic stuff. There is some symbolism. I'll probably look into it because I think there is something significant to it. But I think ultimately it may relate to Wicca or witchcraft and the Great Rite and the knife and the chalice, the god and the goddess, and the sacrifice just being allegory. And we talked about this before, but I think that's built into that. Nightmare on Elm Street has some interesting connotations when we talk about the mind war and fear based mind control, because these characters are in a dream, and as long as they are allowing their emotions to override their intellect, the dream gains power and they manifest more of their own terrors projected outwardly, and they can die in the dream if they can't overcome it. But it's based upon fear, and Freddy Krueger in many ways is kind of like one of these, um, like not adrenochrome, but yeah, in a sense, you have these movies where you have these bad guys who are just intent on draining the soul energy and scaring it out of people. And he's one of these characters that also, interestingly and disturbingly, the character was a child predator who was incinerated in an oven by the parents of the children he abused. Now, there is something to, I believe, the elm tree, and there's something to the elm tree, and it has to do with a poem, I believe, and some myth about how if you burn an elm tree, I'll see if I can find it, because they had to do with the burning of Freddy Krueger. But yeah, I think it'd be worth looking back at these things because it's all programming. In fact, I had a commenter, frequent commenter, a Messianic Charlatan, emailed me last week. I'll see if I can pull that up right now. He had mentioned these horror movies and how perhaps the horror movies were part of the general conditioning so that what we see in the news we would find to be believable. And I think there's something to it. I mean, a lot of the times, I think what we see in the movies, our frame of reference is really just, I mean, what we see on the news, our frame of reference is movies. John LeBon had pointed out that many documentaries about the Pearl Harbor attacks are referencing video footage created after the fact. But I think there may be something to these movies in terms of their programming value. The movie Pinhead has some interesting connections as well. The Pinhead character and the symbol of the cube, the nails in the head. There's this Saturnian aspect to him that's kind of worth looking at. It also has a lot of similarities with the other character, Krueger. Friday the 13th, though, that date has a specific connection to the Knights Templar, which I don't know if it has much to do with it, other than the character is a zombie, someone who raises from the dead. And one of the themes here with these movies, of course, is references to this ritual death resurrection theme, kind of apparent through a lot of these movies. But it would be worth looking at. As far as occult symbolism, though, I mean, I didn't recognize what it was at the time, so I'm assuming I just missed it or absorbed it passively, and that's how it works. I would say that the programming is the primary purpose of all of these movies anyway. Dillian Parrish says, I recycle daily to make money, nothing to do with the planet. There are some people who do it out of guilt, to expiate their guilt. You know, like sin. They'll laugh at sin. They'll laugh at flood god myths. They'll laugh at concepts of heaven from the holy books. But they believe in space, and they recycle because they feel guilty. And they have this concept of sin they call their carbon footprint. Recycling is a religious act. Unless you're doing it for the money, which I think is respectable. But if you're genuflecting before Gaia, apologizing for your decisions as a consumer, and that's what you're doing. And when you confess your sins, what are you actually doing? You're thinking about your actions of the past week, and you're assessing which ones were good and virtuous and which ones were not. And then you're apologizing accordingly. Well, when you recycle, you're going through your trash, and going through your trash is kind of an act of submission in itself, and you're looking and saying, okay, what was bad and what was good? What bad decisions have I made? In fact, there's this thing on NBC called Climate Confessions. Write your confession or view confessions. You can read them. And this is at nbcnews.com. And you could submit your confession: plastics, meat, energy, food waste, paper, or transportation. What have you done that you should feel guilty about? Enter your confession here. I don't want to submit it because I'm afraid it goes to the CCP and I'll end up at the wrong end of a firing squad at some point for being a carbon super spreader. I'm not going to admit to this because these are crimes. These are crimes against the state. View confessions. Okay, waste nothing. I was taught that you eat everything on your plate. We grow some of what we eat and compost the rest. Okay, you're just bragging to Gaia. I'm working on buying less. I'm 66. Buried my husband last year, and I keep buying food for him. Grieving is strange. I use reusable plastic bags to offset deforestation. Okay, a lot of these people are just virtue signaling. I am writing this confession on a cell phone made of plastic. Right, you shouldn't have it. If you believe the science, you shouldn't even be driving. We have a heretic here. There is no climate crisis, although we could do better. I read the Bible and the world never ends. Jesus saves it in the end. I'm a good recycler except I overuse paper towels. I have two very old cats who are messy, and I use them to avoid excessive cat hair. So you can't deal with excessive cat hair to save the planet? How selfish. That's how you're supposed to think. And climate angst is a thing. There are people who are on medication, and it's because of propaganda. We're talking psychosomatic effects. Okay, let's see here. Dylan Parrish says Jeff Bezos is William Shatner. I don't know how that works. I think they're distinctly different. Although Shatner did ride on Bezos's rocket. Well, I mean, I think he's one of the oldest individuals to go up into fake space, right? 93 years old today. And he's out there right now doing a book tour. I don't hold it against him. Yeah, he's a space faker now. He crossed this thing though where he's gone from faking space in the movies to faking space on the news. So he's crossed that line. And what is an astronaut if not someone who fakes going to space? And if you look at them in comparison, the astronauts to the actors who play the astronauts on TV, look at William Shatner and compare him to Buzz Aldrin. Who's a better astronaut? Who's a better actor? Well, I would argue that William Shatner is a way better astronaut. He's been to more planets, more galaxies, he's more experienced in fake space environments, and he's met aliens. He's been intimate with aliens, if you've seen the Star Trek movies, whereas Buzz Aldrin's been on the moon, like once. That's hardly anything to brag about. But I would argue he's a better actor. He has stayed in character since the 60s. Dylan Parrish says Bill Gates is Meghan Markle. Okay, it seems like you're just grabbing names out of a bag, which I don't mind, but I need some evidence to substantiate it. Immortal AI says Jason is a significant name in occult circles. Jason Voorhees. And yeah, the Friday the 13th thing is intriguing. There's probably a lot more to it. Crystal Lake. The symbolism, I don't know. Masks, knives. Is it just gratuitous murder for shock value? For programming? Not sure. Elephant Tusk says, I heard Candyman has a ton of occult symbolism. Candyman's all about bees, and all these horror movies, and now that I think about it, they all have the one eye symbolism. And here's one, Jeepers Creepers, one eye symbolism. And there's been some great breakdowns of these movies on YouTube, where Jeepers Creepers is about this killer monster thing, but it's actually, strangely and grotesquely, a Christ archetype, JC. And when you get into these movies, you're like, yeah, there's always a subtext. We need to have like a weekly group movie breakdown because I think we could do some good work because a lot of these movies need to be examined. And I feel like when you go back and you view the programming, it removes its power to influence your thinking in the future. I think that's an important component here. For example, they use movies to put things in the realm of possibility so that when you see it on the news, it's just more plausible. And so you've seen certain things, perhaps in the past, that you just took for granted as real. And I think it's important to go back and retro auto hoax, but we also need to go back and look at these old movies. There's this tendency of some people to just, and we kind of eradicated it for the most part, but it's like, did they just start faking stuff 9/11 or after uh, the school shooting started in Littleton? No. And I would also point out that since Littleton, every single high profile shooting has been equally fake. But the big channels only talk about one or two events. They only focus on that one. Why is that? Misdirection. If they were legitimate, they would be breaking apart every one of these events systematically, and they couldn't, the other side wouldn't be able to maintain an effective rate of damage control. But nobody's organizing that. Tom103 says occult symbolism in kid family shows is more sinister. Horror, you would expect it. Yeah, that's true. And a lot of the times the subtext goes over the heads of the audiences, and it seems like, I don't know, it almost seems disingenuous. So, for example, Wall-E. Wall-E is obviously a retelling of Noah's Ark, Old Testament themes, but nowhere is it mentioned in the movie. They just retold the story in a modern context. But it's a subtext that I think is very significant because the modern framework we have, our scientific paradigm, is templated with many of these old myths built into it. I mean, I still maintain climate change is neo-eschatology. It's a flood myth. But all of this was reiterated in that movie Wall-E, and I'm thinking, why are they putting these biblical themes in these movies? And these are movies geared towards a, progressive utopian future post-Bible. Same stories though. Okay, continuing. Lean Dion says also the intros to series are filled with symbols and almost subliminal messages, especially sci-fi shows. Yeah, good point. The intros, the montages. And when you watch these things passively, you may miss quite a bit. But I watched the Elvis movie very closely because I had been expecting certain things to be in there, and I was just like, okay, I want to see if they're going to convey a lot of the symbolism that we've attached to the rock star and what this all means as far as symbolically. And this is just a recurring theme on this channel. We're always looking at movies and breaking them down. So I'm watching this movie, and if you go and look at the montage at the beginning, it tells an entire story in itself. It's really intriguing because it's like, well, nobody would be processing that. This is just stuff you're absorbing. And I think a lot of it is the visuals. Like, for example, none of us can really know right now. We couldn't describe accurately what it would look like necessarily if space junk started raining down upon us. We have some ideas from movies. But then we have these more recent events, more recent movies that seem to be focusing on just that. Getting us acclimated to stuff falling from the sky. What does it look like if, like Moonfall, for example? Like they're really inundating us with this. Like when 9/11 happened, we had 10 plus years of movies where similar things were happening. Planes exploding, jet fuel. Jet fuel is one of the main characters in so many action movies. Just explosive jet fuel. Buildings constantly exploding. They normalize things. So right now, I think we're in the process of having space junk normalized. I mean, there's that family suing NASA for mental anguish, 90K. Elephant Tusk says also the movie Predestination was insane. Final Destination also was something I was talking about last year. The that MFer is not real woman freaking out on the plane. That happened to be 23 years from the first Final Destination movie, where a character freaks out on a plane, and we had picked up on some fascinating connections there. I've watched the Final Destination movies, and it's replete with references to the number 23. And I don't know if that's ever been adequately explained. I'll put it up on the screen here. If you just search, okay, Route 23, where a multi-vehicle pileup killed 18 people. This is from Wikipedia on Final Destination. But you'll find that there's a ton of 23s. Death is moving towards Route 23, and people have documented it. And so 23 years after the first movie, they're rebooting the whole series. And then you have this lady on the plane freaking out. And then this Final Destination in real life. And it happened on the same place. And this was last year, same time, 23 years after the original. Final Destination in real life, woman dies after log falls on her car. And this is from TMZ, so you know it's real. But at one point, I had considered that maybe that lady freaking out on the plane was doing some kind of PR stunt for Final Destination. But a few other movies, I mean, we're always talking about the ones that have the heavy symbolism that relates to, for example, Stanley Kubrick. You know, these movies that reference the big psyops. But I haven't spent a lot of time looking at the horror movies, but I think we need to. Lean Dion says powerful priming for the viewer to soak up the show's programming. Different producers do different intro scenes, I think. Well, I've been pointing out too that these movies are preparing us for the advent of a female black president for some time. I mean, look at Fallout. You have this scene where it specifically, you look, it's got the Trump with the bloody head on the side, and the actress or the lady who takes over, the female president figure who takes over after that, is clearly a Kamala representative. Just like you had the Obama representative in A Man in Full and the Trump representative. They're constantly doing this where they're merging the real world with the movie world consistently. And you can see how they're prepping us. And that's why it's interesting to note that you have individuals like Elon Musk, who is preceded by literature that reference him. You know, he's a combination of many characters, as in the role he's playing. He's a composite, but Werner von Braun, Mars, a technical tale about the Elon being the first colonizer of Mars. Like, these are not coincidences. I think the movies that we talk about here often represent the best allegories for how things really are. Like The Village. If you want to know how this world works, The Village. John Carpenter's movies are great for this as well. They Live, In the Mouth of Madness, another one. The movie They Live also confronts this thing where the protagonist realizes that nobody else around him can share his vision, that the glasses are only to be worn by one person at a time, and he has to literally fight his friend to get his friend to look through that lens. So it kind of shows the futility of trying to wake anybody up at all. Okay, look at this here. Mick West on X said, quote, fake videos have always been a problem, but with AI, the quality and ease of creation is improving exponentially. This does not mean that videos are not good evidence. It means that video needs providence. Ideally, you want multiple videos of the same event from verified people. Oh, you mean like we've never had at a mass shooting event or any of these events that we're talking about? We don't have multiple videos of the same event from verified people. They're always anonymous flip phones walking through the events. Now, I'm looking at this with great interest because Mick West is always debunking fake UFO videos. But he never takes that same level of skepticism and directs it towards NASA. And this is a huge blind spot. If you sat him down and showed him in succession two videos, a fake UFO video and some fake NASA footage, he's going to say, that UFO video is fake because this, and that. And then he's going to look at the NASA video and say, that's real. And his jaw's going to drop because it's so beautiful. It's like, no. There's some kind of wall that goes up. Alright, moving on here. Blue Montauk on X says, I hope you're all sitting down for this one. The Earth has stopped spinning and all the stars have disappeared. This is a video of an astronaut's view of planet Earth while in space, and this is from Blue Montauk. And yeah, if you look, there are no stars, and the Earth is not spinning. That is very disturbing. How do you explain this? You look at the ISS footage, and it's zipping around at 17,000 miles per hour every 93 minutes. You got a sunset. And then you look at this footage, and it's like, there it is, just sort of sitting there. And I don't know how to describe it other than bendy. Like the Earth is always bendy. It's not just a ball. Sometimes it's flat. It just depends. It's always just an edge of it too. But no, you don't see it moving. I can point out a host of problems, and we will. I mean, they can't fix it. There's not enough time for them to do damage control to fix this thing. One of my favorite things to point out is the ISS Earth view at night. This is why the people who defend it are just sad at this point. It's sad. Okay, so let's look at Earth from a distance. And we'll go with Starman. So when Starman is in space, this car that Elon Musk sent into space, you look at the Earth. And you'll notice that the dark side of the Earth is dark. And I believe we call that night. So just to establish this, you're looking at the Earth, and the other side of the Earth is completely dark as this car is orbiting the Earth. Okay, so what happened? Well, the sun only shines on one side of the ball, so presumably you wouldn't see any lights there. Well, that means that we can't tell what countries are here. We can't really see anything. But now let's look at this. This is the ISS above the Earth at night. And look at that. Pretend for a moment that you can't tell it's completely computer generated. What do you see? Well, it's lit like a Christmas tree. So are you telling me that between the distance the ISS is, 250 miles, and the distance that Starman was, that somehow these lights somehow got lost, that the light loss was so great that it doesn't project into space? Again, the Earth is like a glowing Christmas tree, a spherical Christmas tree. It's just everywhere lights, lights, lights. You can see every city. I mean, that's remarkable. But contrast it with the darkness here. How do you explain that? I haven't seen any adequate explanations. I haven't heard anything. Lean Dion says they never show it spinning, also void of stars, space junk, satellite. Yeah, where's the space junk? Where's the space junk? Oh, space junk is such a problem, but we've never seen it before. Except that piece that hit that person's house and they're suing NASA for $90,000. I would do it for much more. I mean, they're suing for mental anguish. Let's say hypothetically that we all believed in space junk and that at any moment, a piece of a rocket, a piece of a satellite could puncture a hole in your roof and possibly even crush your skull. Because we do have an example of space junk hitting a house, of a meteor hitting someone's house and landing in their bed. But if we all believed it, it would be scarier than the threat of Russia hitting us with a hypersonic nuclear warhead. It'd be scarier than any other threat I can think of. That space junk could just start randomly coming down and killing us. So this is grounds for a class action lawsuit is what I'm saying. Mental anguish. We have to sleep with our helmets on or we can't sleep. Immortal AI says not very convincing imagery. This is why I like to point out too that NASA's special effects is from 2015. This is pretty bad. You're supposed to believe this is lightning on the right. This is not a camera view. Oh, let's address this really quick too. You're not looking at a camera view. There is no lens from a camera. There's no camera in somebody's hand holding this this view in its frame of reference. No one's looking through a viewfinder and seeing this. This is entirely created within a CGI environment. This is all computer generated. This is not space. It's fascinating how people fall for it, but I mean, look at these ridiculous colors. But how can anybody think this looks real? You're lying to yourself if you're saying this looks real. And what I would like to do is have some video editors, specialists in the field, react. Let's have them do some reactions to some footage, real or fake, real or fake. And I can prove that not only are people visually illiterate and they can't tell real from fake, but those who should be able to tell have a blind spot when it comes to NASA footage. It's interesting how they just will literally not process it as fake. That's why I use the phrase visual illiteracy. The Mudflood says they need to destroy the ISS. It's getting tedious for them to keep that stuff streaking across the sky. There is nothing streaking across the sky. That's a popular misconception. And it arrives from an argument, an appeal to ad populum. Like a lot of people have seen it, therefore it's there. Nobody's seen it. There is no eyewitness to the ISS. You have liars and well-intentioned liars who feel like they're doing a good deed. The ISS transits in front of the sun and moon don't count. Those are not eyewitness events. You can't see it when it's passing from the sun. You rely on your telescope and a solar filter. You can't see it at night. It's not reflecting the sun because it's in the shadow of the Earth. Therefore, you're waiting to see a silhouette in front of the moon, but again, it's coming through a telescope. There are no eyewitnesses. And people will say, well, can you just go outside of your app and record the ISS? You've never done it. Every single person who's ever told me to do that has not done it. And if they could do it, they would go outside and do it and record the ISS in a selfie video. But no one can do it. And the standards of evidence are such that you cannot just say because a lot of people say there's something there, there must be something there, that they are faking something. No, I would argue that's not even fakeable. How do you fake an orbital object 17,000 miles per hour reaching these transit points consistently? The fastest human craft they've built so far, maybe 5,000 miles per hour? But no, it's not even fakeable. Except, I mean, you could hypothetically use low-flying airplanes with lights, and some will say, well, maybe that's what I saw. No, you're grasping at straws. You didn't see that. The Mudflood says the lightning distorts the canvas when you zoom in. Yes. Well, people want to believe, and the issue here too is that they are low information believers. So when we weigh these things, on the left you have low information believers. I believe it because I saw it on TV and I trust the authority. And then you have informed non-believers. Oh, I have 1,000 reasons why I don't believe in that. What weighs more? Informed non-belief or low information belief? If you're being honest, you're going to say, well, the person who knows what he's talking about probably carries more weight here. But most people are dishonest and they say, nope, I just believe. And that's the difference, though. Believers in a religion rely on faith and trust, and they see these as virtues. I see these as mentally debilitating, putting you in the, I guess, making you vulnerable, but yeah, putting you within the control of whoever's writing the scripts, whoever's writing the programs. You're basically programmable. And society is really consisting of just really two groups of people, and one group is minute, the programmers, very small group. Then you have the programmed, everybody else. This is the advent of the deprogrammed. This hasn't been a thing. The only people who are really in the know, the programmers, were initially programmed and let in on the secrets to some level, on a need-to-know basis. And I don't know how consistent it is. The people who are involved in faking terror attacks may not know that space is fake, and vice versa. I don't know exactly. I have to do a Venn diagram to figure out, what we could reasonably expect as far as their various levels of situational awareness. I would imagine the astronauts know about everything. Like that's the big secret. If you figure that out, everything else, it's the same special effects department. But the deprogrammed are those who have figured out that there has been a merging of real and fake, and that this happened before we were born. You have people like Jack Dorsey coming out and warning us that AI is getting so advanced it's going to hijack reality. Mick West, it's getting so advanced everybody can create believable video. Well, that's the problem. That is a huge problem. And my point of it is, it's not something that's coming. What these individuals aren't noticing, because they're in a box, is that it already happened. We already live in a deep faked reality. This has been true since they brought about the God construct known as the atomic bomb. Do you know anybody here? Anybody here in the chat? Do you know anyone who worships that particular war god? And when I say worship, it doesn't mean they like it. It means that they're scared of it. They're God-fearing. Do you know any God-fearers? And again, I'm not talking about the Bible's God. I'm talking about the mushroom cloud, the nuke. That is a God construct. And how do you pray to it? You get on your knees and you genuflect below your desk. Get below your desk, you duck and you cover and you face it. That's how you worship this war god. That's how you show that you are terrified of it. And all the nations of the world worship this god, or they believe in it, and they know that if we don't restrain ourselves, it's going to come judge us all. And if you look at these big psychological warfare events as a time, and these are like whether it's shootings or even the climate change or the big weapons of mass destruction or any of the eschatologies, these are just ways for them to insert contemporary myths and God constructs. That's really what it comes down to. People say, well, why would they do it? Why do they lie? And it all does come down to control. I talk about this a lot. Instrumentum regni, instrument of monarchy, Latin phrase, used to express the exploitation of religion by the state as a means of controlling the masses. Here's a quote by Polybius who said, "Superstition maintains the cohesion of the Roman state." Why? Because every multitude is fickle, full of lawless desire, unreasoned passion, and violent anger. The multitude must be held in by invisible terrors and pageantry. That explains it all. This is the story of the village, if you watch the movie The Village. So they've introduced these God constructs to keep us under control. And I'm just rejecting one after another. And I'm just asking it, do you believe in Gaia? Is Gaia going to flood the place? Tominoid said, what if there was a celestial light they call the ISS? I've heard that before. It's more grasping at straws for people who weirdly want to believe there's something up there. But I would say, prove it. Nobody can prove it. If there's a celestial light that they call the ISS that aligns with the app, then take a selfie with it. Nobody can prove it. And I hear people saying, well, maybe there's a drone. Prove it. Again, there's no evidence. And this is an important point. All of the evidence for the ISS is manufactured by bad actors, and it is debunkable or rejectable. ISS transits in front of the sun and moon, rejectable. And anybody supplying this is questionable. I really do find it to be highly likely that you would have to be working on behalf of NASA. Elephant Tusk says, Tim, it'd be interesting to do a show on the Illuminati cards they haven't played yet, with your analysis on what cards they might play next. Yeah, we can do that for sure. Steven Jackson, Illuminati playing cards, very interesting. My favorite card is Interesting Times. That's the one that has the individual with the question mark on his shirt. And the background has, I think, Godzilla, nukes, chaos. I see tentacles. I see frogs falling from the sky. Interesting reference there. Frogs falling from the sky could be a reference to Pepe the Frog and Donald Trump. They've made these connections. But yeah, he's standing here with his arms out and he's got his shirt exposed and it's a question mark. And it says, things are getting so weird, not even the secret masters are sure what's going on. Unfortunately, this makes them grumpy and they argue a lot, slam doors, and destroy small nations. But we're living in very interesting times. Conspirataining times. Okay, let's see here. Ryler05 says, didn't Steve Jackson play the role of George Floyd? Steve Jackson is the one who came out and said he was George Floyd's twin. Did he play the role of him? I don't know. I've heard that. And it could have been accomplished with some media fakery. It's within the realm of fakeability. And it connects to everything else. Steven Jackson was the last person to interview Kobe Bryant alive, interestingly enough, in All That Smoke. And if you find it, look at the last interview alive that Kobe Bryant gave, and it was to Steven Jackson. 42, by the way. 42 at the time that Floyd was killed. And at the very end, they do a Masonic grip. Elephant Tusk says frogs fell from the sky in the movie Magnolia starring Tom Cruise. Joined by Flat Fact and X322X. Thank you for joining. Lean Dion says the most conspirating times in history, I'd estimate. I'd say so too. I mean, this is really interesting to watch. We have this. It's like a religious war. The mainstream and the alternate. But we have all these new cults coming up and stuff that wouldn't have even been believable to me 10 years ago is commonplace. Like people believing in reptilians used to be pretty extreme, but now it's normal to have entire cults dedicated to the idea that century-old dead presidents are going to come back to save them. There's nothing people won't believe. There are certain prerequisites, though. A group of people have to also believe it. There has to be a group. Believers are a curious bunch. And when you look at the structure of the Lie World Order, it's a pyramid. At the capstone level are the programmers. Below the capstone, you have layer after layer after layer of people who are part of the infrastructure of mass deception. But they're layered because it's on a need-to-know basis how much they know. The only people who have the big picture are the people in the capstone, and we, the IPS. The people at the bottom live in ignorance. They live in a subjective worldview, which is belief system versus belief system. And the difference between a belief system and what we're positing here, more of an operating system, is we can reality test the parameters. We can include what we know about how news media works in our assessment, and they can't. To be an alt media person or a mainstreamer or a woker, you cannot include in your assessment the presence of fakeability, of psychological warfare operations, of perception management that includes the fusion of entertainment and news. You have to have the overview effect. The astronauts claim that you get so far from the Earth, you have an overview effect. You see it all as one. You get the big picture, and it's a cognitive boost, and now you want to save the world. Well, that's fake. But what we have is truly an authentic overview effect. Stepping outside of their programming and looking at, okay, there's a worldview, a collectively agreed upon mass delusion, and then there's the real thing. That's the overview effect. Recognizing that there's a distinction. The map is not the territory. And it's because the interior map is created by their cartographers. Elephant Tusk says, I've seen reptilians in the astral realm. You look, I'm sure you have, but when people say that they're astral travelers and remote viewers and time travelers and perceivers of reptilians, that's a whole other class of claims that don't make it to the autohoaxology desk. Because we are specifically trying to delineate between real and fake. And I feel like mysticism and synchromysticism in the realm of conspiracy has always obfuscated reality. And people tend to just go all the way. They're like, well, news is fake. Everything they're telling us is fake, so reality is fake. It's all a simulation. And it's like, no, you can throw away the map. That's good enough. You can formulate your own map. But to conflate the two is error. And it leads people to the extreme. I've heard this kind of attitude from a few people, even Alex Jones once. He's like, well, so what if the world is flat? It's all simulation. Nothing's real. David Icke, doesn't matter. It's all what we believe. They just go from what should be, let's look at what is objectively real, to everything is fake. And of course, mysticism is obfuscation, and synchromysticism has always hidden. It has pretty much provided a cover for the scripters, for the writers, the programmers. Flat Fact says, have you looked into the characters around the termed final experiment? I have heard a little bit here and there. If you want to post some links, I'm all for it. I really find it questionable when people are against exploration. I wonder why. I mean, if you're looking at this from a marketing perspective, getting an idea out there, if the idea is valid, you want it to spread. If it's not valid, maybe you still also want more attention on it because then it can be properly assessed. The truth should not fear investigation. So I find it very questionable when certain truthers are like, no, don't go to Antarctica. They're just going to lead you in a. In fact, I heard David Weiss say, if you go to Antarctica and you agree that if you see a 24-hour sun, the Earth is a ball, they're going to trick you with a helicopter with a fake sun making a circle around you. He actually put that out there as an argument, and I'm thinking, why would you even posit such a ridiculous notion? Because just the fact of a quote flat earther going to the South Pole is newsworthy, generates interest, and where attention goes, energy flows, and what you have is kind of like what we have here, think tanking. Bad arguments assessed, good arguments addressed, but we're not going to get anywhere by talking in circles year after year. So I'm all for it. Nick Fingar says, did Will contact you? I haven't been contacted. I'll put my email address, infiniteplainsociety@gmail.com. And I'm 100% interested. In fact, I looked into it. If I had $10,000, I would book a trip to Antarctica right now. I've been looking around. Just to make an observation. I mean, I'm just surprised at the lack of initiative. All right, moving on. The Mud Flood Society says we need another Mad Mike. Yeah, well, Flat Earth didn't really deserve Mad Mike. If you look at how they all responded to it, he gave them an opportunity. I mean, if you look at what happened, it was all a success all around. Despite what people say now with their rewriting of history, what we were doing was essentially trying to move the ball forward. It's like, look, now we got behind this. We had a Science Channel show ready to showcase several different individuals attempting to make it to space. So we were already also in the process of getting individuals together for trips to Antarctica, and this is back in 2019, 2020. But some people would rather just sell apps and maps and not have that threatened. It's like you sound like a glober at that point. You're like, I must protect my model. I'm invested in my model. Well, I'm not invested in a model. I don't trust the one I was indoctrinated with, and I need more information before I go to the next one. Okay, moving on. Southern Charmed said to me, oh, so cloud seeding is just a conspiracy and no need to worry about it? How many of you are worried? How many of you are worried about cloud seeding? I responded to this person, if you're afraid of cloud seeding, then you need to talk to somebody. But this is a clever approach that many truthers will use. You say, I don't believe in what you believe, and they'll say, oh, so you don't believe, and then therefore you're okay with it, or it's nothing to worry about. We can just look the other way. Like, oh, you're not afraid of 5G towers, we can just look away. Yeah. Yeah, until you can prove that these things are melting my brain, yeah, I'm not going to automatically assume the worst case scenario. And so is this person better off than me because they're scared of cloud seeding? Cloud seeding is expensive and ineffective, and it's kind of a letdown when you think about it. They can't just make clouds. Cloud seeding is an attempt by planes to inject something into the clouds that are already there to hopefully nudge a little more rain out of it. And it sounds like a scam to me. I think you'd be better off just flying up there with cases and cases of bottled water and just dumping it. So yeah, this person is afraid of cloud seeding. I can find you truthers that are afraid of burial vaults. They call them FEMA coffins. Zen of Machiavelli said, why did they paint him orange? Orange, and he's talking about Biden. Okay, oranges are a powerful symbol in The Godfather. They foreshadow tragedy. Yeah, I remember a few scenes in The Godfather. The oranges falling, scattering across the ground. He says they foreshadow tragedy when they appear before a character's death. Initially, they meant to brighten up the set, but they became an ominous motif throughout the Godfather trilogy. Joe Biden mocked for orange appearance in prime time address. Okay, interesting. Now, then, how does this explain Trump and the constant orange face? Is it the same thing? That we're just being prepped? And it did look ridiculously Trump-like. Mudflood says 5G transmitters can be used as beam-forming direct energy weapons, but that's why the technology is controlled and we don't have 5G Chinese tech in the USA. See, I don't believe that. I really don't. I don't believe in direct energy weapons. And I don't believe that any of these trutherisms are anything other than planting fear in the truthers themselves. If they can get you to be afraid of convenience stores and Cirrus clouds and 5G towers, then what can't they program you to be afraid of? And then I would also argue that if you're really afraid of it, how are you responding to it? What actions are you taking? People who say they're afraid of clouds don't wear masks. That kind of destroys their credibility. Mudflood Society says you can beam form Wi-Fi routers, and with enough of them, you can disrupt someone's heart. And these are also partisan fears too. The right wing in the conspiracy realm fears new technology, and the left tends to have their fear pointed at things like CO2, big trucks, basically any kind of industrialization, any kind of drilling. But they each have things that make them afraid of the world, is what I'm saying. They're afraid of chemicals, food dyes. I'm not a fearful person, and I see all these things that are hypothetically scary, and I think, well, this is how they control us, though. Isn't this their ancient technology of mind control? Superstitions. It's just not goblins and ghosts and werewolves anymore. Now it's 5G towers and chemtrails and bowl cut shooters. These are new superstitions. You'd actually call them hyperstitions because they are reinforced by the state's echo chambers, by its media to make them seem even realer and react as though they are real. I think you're more likely to die from a 5G tower falling on your head. Like, that's more likely. It's more likely to kill you if someone hits it while you're crossing the street, then it falls, and then it crushes you, than it'll ever pose a threat with some kind of a beam. And this is why I address these things, though. If you entertain every hypothetical thing to be afraid of, you would be nothing but paranoid 24/7. I know people who don't drink tap water because of Alex Jones. I know people who buy tap water. They buy the bottled water. They have tap water. They use it in their coffee. They use it for cooking, showering, washing dishes, but when it comes to drinking, they won't touch it. Oh no. And I'm like, that's so strange. You'll smoke cigarettes, you'll do possibly other drugs, but you won't drink tap water. Interesting choice there. But you'll use bottled water all day long, and if you don't have bottled water, you won't drink water, you'll be dehydrated. And it's all because Alex Jones convinced people that fluoride in the water will make you apathetic, that fluoride in the water will turn you into a communist. And this is an old debunked conspiracy theory being peddled by a guy who is selling you water purifiers. Don't you remember that story about the underwear bomber? The guy who went on the plane and he had explosives in his underwear, and the guy next to him managed to stop him from blowing up the plane. Anyway, this is a post 9/11 thing. Umar Abdul Muttalib, the underwear bomber, Nigerian terrorist, 23-year-old, who was sentenced to 4 life terms. But anyway, he said he was proud to kill in the name of Allah. He tried to blow up a plane on Christmas. It turns out, though, that his father, I believe, was somehow connected to those body scanners. So he's making money off of the terror industrial complex because we need body scanners because people might have bombs in their underwear. So there were some suggestions that this was a psyop, that it was his father had employed his own son as a crisis actor. But my point of it is, what's the difference between selling people on terrorism and then making money on the solution, or selling people on the idea that they should be terrorized by their kitchen sink and then you sell them a solution. Ryler05 says communists are the opposite of apathetic, though. They're always trying to get involved. Yeah, they say it's meant to pacify the populations. They used it in the gulags or something. I hear this stuff all the time, but it's like it's never had that effect on me. But I will admit that I stopped drinking tap water for a time, and I got annoyed by the burden of having to carry the bottles of water upstairs, downstairs, all the trash, constantly bottled waters everywhere. And I remember thinking about this one day, and I'm like, did I get psyoped by Alex Jones into not drinking tap water, but I'm drinking it with my coffee? And I realized that I had been made into a fool. So I didn't buy a water filter. I just said I no longer care about this issue. Chemtrails don't scare me, and fluoridated water no longer scares me. And it would be nice if it would chill you out. Like, I'm a little agitated right now. I feel like doing some activism. I want to go punch an Antifa. And then you have some water. Then you just chill out. And I want to have some water and it'll calm me down. No, it doesn't work that way. Elephant Tusk says bottled water is an unregulated industry. Best to just round up your own tap. Yeah, that's another thing too. You don't know what's in it. Did it really come from the purest glacier in the far north? Did Chuck Norris mean mug the ground until his Sea-Force water came out of it? Like, we don't know the origin of any of it. I remember driving across the border from El Paso into Mexico and back, and there'd be these kids just rushing up, and they'd jump on your car and wash your windows and give you bottled water and sell you the bottled water. But you could tell they had just found bottles and then refilled them. The Mud Flood says stay away from the plastics as much as you can. That's a real issue. Or it's a fake issue or a non-issue. I think it's a non-issue. Because that's another thing too. So Jones is like, no, you can't drink the tap water. It'll turn you into a communist. But he's like, don't drink the bottled water. It'll mess with your hormones, like bisphenol A, and it'll raise your estrogen. So now you're screwed, unless you're drinking Alex Jones's water. Okay, let's move on. Trutherville is just nothing but scared people. Here's Alex Jones talking about the hurricane and how it's part of secret weather manipulation. Now, whatever they show you from the ISS, whenever it's a hurricane, like, look at this hurricane, it's so bad, that's always fake. So you have real weather. You have real weather phenomenon. But what they report on TV doesn't always match up. Think about the difference between the real thing that happens at a mass shooting event versus what we're shown on TV. It's just dramatized. So we don't actually know it's as bad as they say it is. They crisis act on the weather. We have countless examples of reporters leaning into the wind. They're like, this is so terrible. Climate change is killing us all. And then in the background, you have people just calmly walking across the street, not even affected by the wind. Or you have reporters in the water up to their waist, and they're reporting from the front lines of the hurricane. But then you find out that they're actually kneeling in the water. They rely on these tricks. So they psyop everything. They've turned the weather into a crisis actor. But here's Jones hyping up secret weather.
The companies just take the jet fuel they're given. They only got 4 or 5 big jet fuel makers, and they put it in there, and they add the barium salts, the aluminum dioxide, the other isotopes. Some of them are nuclear, atomic, radioactive, and they spray it on us. So I don't know if this hurricane coming to Texas is steered or not.
They spray it on us. Again, look, you're getting sprayed on by all these chemicals and you're not wearing a mask. You're either very brave or you're not worried about chemtrail lung. And Alex Jones sounds like he has chemtrail lung at times.
But I know Houston has been hit with record floods in the last 3 years in a row, and now a hurricane is barreling down on it right now. Just a few months ago, it blew out hundreds of buildings.
This sounds like climate change alarmism, but it's coming from the right now. Like, oh, it's so hot right now. Yeah, it's called summer. It's called seasons. And they always freak out. I'm listening to a podcast now. It's a Daily Beast podcast, and they're talking about climate change and how it disproportionately affects the Latino community, different from everybody else, and we need climate justice. It's pretty much an extension of Marxist class warfare. Breaking news, Boeing agrees to plead guilty to criminal fraud charge regarding the 737 MAX crashes in 2018 and 2019, and they're going to pay a $243 million fine. Another example of Boeing as an epithet for disaster, and we have the Boeing Starliner right now, stranded in space, and there's some subtext to it. The Boeing Starliner in space, the Calypso capsule, a reference to the Odyssey. The Calypso being, of course, the name of the nymph. Calypso is the nymph that holds Odysseus captive for 7 years, strands him on an island. So you got the stranded Calypso, and then the reference to the Odyssey, which is a connection to the space Odyssey. So there's a deeper level of interpretation to this story. Okay, moving on. We were live earlier with Fakeologist. If you want to get that, sign up for the newsletter below. Just click the ips.monster link, and I'll be sending out that if you missed it. Okay, I got an image here from Andrew McCarthy, and I'm comfortable just calling him a liar. He says, here's one of my favorite photos I've ever captured. So if you look at the photo, it's the ISS in front of the moon. He says, the moment the ISS transited the lunar terminator, captured in broad daylight using a 14-inch scope. These shots require precision, practice, planning, and luck. I can't believe it's real. Well, why can't you? And my response to this was, that's because it's not real. It's as fake as the space churroso. You have these liars who are just propagandizing, putting this fakery out there, and no one calls them out on it. No one challenges it. They assume that the burden of proof has been met, that it's adequate. And no, this falls well within the realm of fakeability. Why do we only get images of the ISS in front of the moon? I'm saying these don't count. If it's in front of the moon or in front of the sun, it doesn't count. I want eyewitnesses. No 14-inch scopes, just use your iPhone. Get the streak. I still can't believe it's real. Like, what is that? Some kind of a slip? Like a Freudian slip? Like he feels guilty about lying, so he has to sort of indirectly admit to it? I don't know, but that's what it looks like to me. All right, phones are open. If you want to call in, number is 563-999-3664. We have one rule here. You have to have evidence for your claims, or you risk being hanged up upon. I wanted to respond to a straw man argument. Not that guy is a full-time activist on Twitter fighting against anybody calling school shootings fake. And he says, sarcastically, because we're talking about how similar these various events are. And Synchromorpheus says to him, participants and witnesses in other events react similarly. And he says, right, because people grieving behave the same way everywhere. How could I have missed that? And what I pointed out here is this. That's a pathetic straw man. A legitimate criticism of the psyops that we're talking about is bigger than just crisis actors. We're not just looking at people laughing or crying at scenes or acting inappropriately when they should be crying. That's a red herring, and that's a feature of maybe one or two of these events. But no, there are a number of hallmarks that we look at that would describe a psyop, that would suggest that this isn't real. And I have a list of them. Things that we look for, indicators, red flags. And one of the key components to skepticism, what defines skepticism, is the suspension of judgment. If you watch the nightly news, do you have enough information to know it to be true, whatever they reported? Let's say there's a mass shooting. You watch the news, you see the body count. Do you, as a viewer, have enough information to say, yeah, I know this is true? And this is going to shock or surprise a lot of people, or they'll just reject this, but the answer is no, you don't. You can't run to your neighbor who's a Second Amendment fanatic and say, hey, look at what you've done. AR-15 struck again. You can't run out with that information. That's hearsay. It's C-say. By the way, C-say is a phrase that we came up with here to describe hearsay but the visual counterpart. And after I coined the phrase CSAY, the DHS jacked it from me. And now they have an annual CSAY day. If you see something, say something. And I was walking through the airport today and I saw signs that said CSAY. If you see something suspicious, say something. But again, my point of it is this critique of media is bigger than one or two of these school shootings the only ones they ever talk about. It's like, who cares? I don't care about Sandy H. I don't care about 9/11. These are individual trees in a forest of fakery. And if you haven't chopped down the rest of the forest, if you haven't burned it by now, within your own mind, figuratively speaking, then you've been led in circles, chasing red herrings, and you've been made into a fool. They distracted you from the world of fakery, from the false worldview, by honing in on a few events that get all the attention. Don't miss the Psy War for the Psy-Op. At this point, I consider any discussion about like Sandy Hook to be worthless, and for the most part, that event has become a limited hangout operation. And look at who's embroiled in this controversy. Alex Jones, Jim Fetzer. I like Jim Fetzer, and he is doing a lot of good work on this matter, but he doesn't connect it to the other events. So it makes me question either his judgment or his motivations. If you're exposing one event and trying to win this one thing, meanwhile ignoring every subsequent event, I think you might be running a distraction campaign, wittingly or not. Another question too is, if you are an operative, how far up the pyramid are you? One of the benefits from skepticism at this level and stepping outside of the MSM plus box and suspending judgment is that we are able to, I think, see the big picture in its entirety. Others are a little blinkered. They're like, oh, maybe the next one will be real. Oh, this one might be real. Let's wait and see. And they're always like, let's wait and see. And I'm like, no, it's fake until proven real preemptively. You don't watch the next SpaceX launch and think, well, maybe the next time they're going to space. This next one is going to be real. No, it was fake from the get-go. The next launch is going to be fake, and the next launch is going to be fake. We can categorically debunk certain types of events. All right, moving on here. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's IPS Insider. And we also have a live Twitter feed. It's IPS Think Tank. Skyfish says, Tim, I just looked at the tracker and it says you can observe it tonight, 11:32 p.m. in the northwest sky. Try to see if you can observe it in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Okay, I have a question. 11:32 p.m. 11:32 p.m. is 3.5 hours after sunset. Okay, so if it's after sunset, that means that the sky above me is going to be night. It's going to be stars. It's going to be dark. There's not going to be anything but stars above. And so if the ISS passes over, how is it going to reflect the sun's light if it's within the Earth's shadow? I guess it's just a question of angles, I suppose, but it's only 250 miles up. So low Earth orbit objects wouldn't really be visible that many hours after sunset. I mean, I'll look, but I'm just saying the believers in the ISS are lazy. They really are. They're passionate, but they're low information believers, and they're too lazy to prove it. And I think we can go ahead and just say that. The burden of proof is on you, and if you're not willing to provide it, your excuse is what? All right, let's continue here. What do we have to do? Put a financial incentive? We'll pay $500 for an ISS sighting from the IPS. I think we could raise the money. The IPS, we could raise $500, and we'll give it to anyone who can do a video selfie with the ISS. But you have to do it live. That way we can watch you not see it. We want to see the embarrassing failures. We want to see people say, yeah, it's scheduled. Like, if I was a believer in this thing, I'd be like, okay, fine. At 11:30, I'm going to be outside looking at the sky. But then what happens if I see a light? Well, what am I going to say? Well, I saw the space station. Most people will say, well, you saw a light, so it might have been. And that might have been is wrong. No, you can't insert that. I use this analogy. If you're out camping and you hear something in the woods, was it a raccoon, a deer, or Bigfoot? If you're a believer in Bigfoots, you might say, well, it might have been Bigfoot. No, I'm sorry, it was never within the realm of possibility. So if you look at the app, you expect there to be a light and you see one, in all likelihood, it was an airplane. I'll put a link to my Twitter account below. It's IPS Insider. That's INCITER. That is the name of the tabloid that we're producing here. Feds spotted coming out of a U-Haul truck in Tennessee. It's funny how all the truthers call the Patriot Front feds like they're insightful. Like, oh, we're not going to be fooled by this. And that they believe January 6th was real. They believe that the rioters weren't all operatives and actors. You've been told to see this as staged. In fact, the truthers out there, like Alex Jones and others, are all saying, oh, these are feds, don't fall for it. It's a nice trick. Like when Baked Alaska Fed was calling Ray Epps a Fed. He's like, look, it's a Fed, Fed, Fed. Well, when you have feds calling people feds, it distracts the viewer from the fact that everybody there is part of the ruse. Rafal says, so what is it? It's nothing. It's not there. That's my point. This is the magic trick. The magic trick was getting people to believe that there is something there based upon secondhand accounts of having seen something. But no one has seen it. And you might find that to be a challenging statement. How can you say nobody's seen the space station? Nobody has. Nobody's seen Bigfoot either. You might find that offensive. Well, no, there are other explanations. I mean, just take out your Occam's razor. You know how many bears walk on their hind legs just randomly? You can find footage of bears. They're quite effective bipedal when they want to be, just walking around on their hind legs. And it's more likely that people have mistaken bears for Sasquatch. We're talking about the realms of possibility, not the realms of what we want to believe. Some people say, I saw a light, maybe it was a UFO. Same argument applies here. No, it wasn't a UFO. You first have to prove you have to prove outer space exists on your own, the way they describe it. And then two, you have to rule out first other more reasonable explanations. But people who want to believe in UFOs will say, I saw a UFO. People who want to believe in the ISS will say, I saw the ISS. But there's no verification. And these are lazy claims, not skeptical claims. All right, let's continue here. I'm going to go through my Twitter feed. Mudflood says outer space is hilarious. Look, I'm not a flat earther, by the way. I want to point out that when I'm talking about the false worldview, both the internal concept of it and the way it's represented to us from NASA, disbelieving that doesn't put me in any category other than skeptic and shape agnostic. And I say shape agnostic because absent a curve, we have no reason to start with the premise that space is an all-surrounding, all-encompassing emptiness, and that we're on an object within that emptiness. That's not even our starting point. Our starting point should be first determining, of course, if there is an edge, or rather what's at the edge of the map they've given us. Absent a curve, there has to be more. I don't automatically assume that where the map ends, it's, quote, outer space and there's something below us. Space isn't all around if the Earth is flat. Space would merely be that which is above us. And this also implies that the stars, the sun, the moon, the celestial objects aren't surrounding us in this big field, but they're rather on a plane above us. And that's another key point. If the Earth isn't a ball, then we can remove all the assumptions of vast distances that they give us. And you'll note too, the low information believers are low information disbelievers. They don't believe the flat earth because they've been told not to believe it, which you shouldn't believe it. You should perhaps investigate or test the presumption, the presuppositions, but they just automatically knee-jerk reject it without looking at what they're rejecting. So they'll say, well, if the Earth was flat, then it would have to be daylight everywhere at once and night everywhere at once. And that's because in their mind, they're still thinking outer space, emptiness, and an object, and the light being 93 million miles away, therefore covering the whole thing, and then going beneath it. And that is not part of the description that we would use. I mean, if we're going to say that the Earth is possibly not a spinning ball, you have to remove the presuppositions that they've given you for the heliocentric system, including specifically the distances, and perhaps even the existence of light years. There are so many things about it that you'd have to almost just throw out and start from scratch. But truth is truth, and if it is true, you should be fine with that. The whole idea of the scientific method is testing, that is, trying to falsify your own theories. If it's not falsifiable, it's not science. It's a ideology. It's a belief system. So there has to be a point too where you have to admit that, well, what would what would prove your model false? And for me, a convincing picture of the Earth from space would do it. We haven't seen it. Show me the curve. Haven't seen it. Mudflood says, if you try to go, you'll find you can see further than you're supposed to be able to. That doesn't mean it's flat. Maybe it's just a lot bigger. Yeah, but when we go with that, if we say, well, maybe it's a lot bigger, you're still bringing in an assumption that it's an object, a discrete object, floating in space. If you're saying it's just bigger, meaning that it's still curved, like why do we have to rule in a curve? That would be my question. But I think that shape is almost an irrelevant term here. We're talking about, I think, open or closed system. And the worldview we have is a closed system. It's closed to special effects being included, recognizing hoaxes, or even lies. We're supposed to believe the media isn't lying. Like, yeah, there's bias here or there, but they're not simulating events. The scale of the lying is just something that is outside of public awareness. I guess that's the main thing here, though. The scale of the lying is so far beyond what people would be willing to accept, and that's because they have been put into this closed system. But the open system means that you're open to the possibility that there's more to the story than what they're telling us, and that includes hoaxes. And if you can include the existence of hoaxes and special effects, then their whole model gets sort of falsified. I find it strange that people are more willing to get mad at conspiracy theorists than look at what they're saying. But another point, too, is that the mainstream media promulgates conspiracy theory. It's actually conspiracy theories and alt conspiracy theory. These are all just designations in a world of subjective belief systems competing. These are just arbitrary terms. What's the definition of a cult? The church down the street from yours? All right, moving on. Today is 7/7/2024. In about 4 days, that'd be on 7/11, we're going to have Justin Moan being on trial. That's the guy who cut off his father's head and he called for militias to rise up. Yesterday was George Bush's birthday, and we were talking about the Georgia Guidestones, which were destroyed 2 years ago on that date. And JLB called in and pointed out some interesting connections between the resemblance of the hospital where Elvis died and the Georgia Guidestones. So they had this stark resemblance. I mean, it's like, wait a minute here. These things look the same. And then he added on to it, the destruction date of that hospital was 11/6, which is like 6/11, which ties into his whole story of the Space Needle in Seattle being destroyed. And that also stands out to me as interesting because after the Georgia Guidestones were bombed, they had to knock them down. But before they knocked them down, there was a profile picture of it, and I remember someone had pointed out that the column looked like from the angle they were showing it, it looked like the Space Needle. I'll see if I can find you a good picture of it. So this is the Georgia Guidestones after the bombing, and it weirdly did look like a Space Needle between twin towers. I'll put that on the screen. So we were comparing this to the hospital where Elvis died, called Baptist Hospital on Union Avenue. He died at 3:30, by the way. But again, this hospital was destroyed on 11/6, which 11/6, 6/11, interesting kind of Seattle Space Needle connection. But yeah, it does have this uncanny resemblance to the Guidestones. Anyway, you can find that in the archives. I posted that last night. We had a long talk. Okay, Mudflow says, I'm not saying it's curved, it's just irrelevant about shape, but the worldview we've been entrained with is demonstrably wrong. Yes. Look, trusting the globe is the same thing as trusting the history books and trusting the media. And referencing it in the like as flat versus round misses the whole point. It's about worldview. And this is a worldview that is curated by a very specific group with very specific agendas. And not only do they curate our worldview, but they seem to have given us one that is truncated, that is constrained. And they have us programmed to think that it's all going to end. So time is now finite. The land is finite. Riley says, I'm not sure if 611 to Seattle Space Needle connection, it's something Jurassic Liars came up with. Yeah, well, here's the connection, as I've come across it, is 611 has been a reoccurring number connected to the inverted 911. 911, you had Muhammad Atta, 33 years old, lead hijacker. So you have the foreign terrorism, a foreign terrorist, alien invasion, 9/11. The domestic violent extremists, the domestic terrorist psyops, and all of the affiliated programming goes to correlate with 6/11. Timothy McVeigh was executed 6/11, 2001, 90 days before Muhammad Atta crashed into the Twin Towers. McVeigh was also 33. The Seattle connection and the Space Needle connection also, I think, go into a lot of buildup that we've seen with various, like, for example, the base. You have this white nationalist terror group called the Base. And interestingly enough, they had targeted the power grid in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. Now, the Base, again, this is a hate group, a militant hate group, American Proud Boys and the Base. Anyway, the whole point of it is that the Base is domestic extremists associated with this number 611, as I'm saying, as I'll point out different reasons why we address 611. But Al Qaeda translates to the Base. So you have the domestic equivalent to Al Qaeda called the Base, Al Qaeda the Base. So these are mirrors. That movie Sound of Freedom with Timothy Ballard made a constant reference to Tim 611. You had 611 is the number associated, or 11/6, with the nuke frequently. Even Oppenheimer wears the K6 badge. Batman, the Batman movie was obviously about right-wing American terrorists bombing an election, and Gotham goes underwater on 11/6. This is like just a few examples, but 11/6, 6/11 being correlated with this domestic equivalent to 9/11. So I had already made these connections in our mind maps and elsewhere. Then I came across Jurassic Liars, and he's referencing 6/11 Seattle. And I'm like, wait, there's quite a lot building toward a 9/11 like event in Seattle, but it's a domestic thing. And that's why the 6 and the 9, being the inversion, ties in here. But I'll bring out the entire mind map and we'll look at the different facets of it because it's 6/11 and 11/6 interchangeable. The film Oppenheimer was done in IMAX. 11 miles long, weighed 600 pounds. So again, 11/6, the nuke, reoccurring theme. But this is where we kind of crossed paths, myself and Jurassic, with the 6/11. And we had already looked at Seattle in 2019 when we had looked at so much of this predictive programming, we're like, look, 11.3, Seattle's going to be ground zero for World War III. It didn't happen on 11.3. It happened on 3.11. We had the pandemic kickoff, ground zero, Seattle. So 11.6, 6.11, again, these are all interchangeable, but the numbers do kind of convey something here. And the inversion there is pretty obviously what they're referencing. Also 1.6, January 6th, but then you go back and Waco, 1.6 million rounds. The election dispute on Fox caused so much damage to Dominion that they sued Fox for 1.6 billion. And I can find numerous examples of 1.6 being foreshadowing for January 6th. Even Alex Jones was on Piers Morgan complaining about the DHS buying 1.6 billion rounds of hollow point, presumably to kill patriots. So he was like 1776 will happen again if you try to take the guns. And then he's there on 1.6 doing a 1776 after saying that the 1.6 billion rounds would make them do a 1776. And Jones was at Waco. He rebuilt the Branch Davidian compound, and Waco was raided over 1.6 million rounds. Timothy McVeigh was at Waco. That's where he was radicalized. It's really interesting when you go back to the genesis of this white Al Qaeda construct and who was there. Jones, Koresh, McVeigh. And then, of course, Waco, American Apocalypse on Netflix is released just the same weekend that Trump kicks off his campaign in Waco. And he says it's the final battle. So many overlapping stories that tells you that this is all fake. Elephant Tusk says these number codes must relate to the Grand Architect. I think they're largely based on the sun and the year, and it's all about time and space, time-space control. Like, for example, 9/11 is the Coptic New Year, and everything seems to relate to the dog star, Sirius. By the way, we're in the dog days of summer now until 8/8. So look for scorched dogs and barbecued dogs in the headlines, like RFK biting a barbecued dog, the dog in Colorado setting the kitchen on fire. Okay, we have a few more minutes here. I'm going to have to head out. We'll be live tomorrow, probably much earlier. So I have a couple examples here. This is the RV fire in Peabody, where the crisis actor had a napalm death shirt. And we talked about the significance of the band Napalm Death kicking off a tour. But more interestingly, napalm is a militia. And I heard that this napalm militia now includes Stu Peters. The desperate far-right grifters are trying to recruit a militia. Is it a MAGA militia or a clown car? Interesting take. The North American Patriot and Liberty Militia. That's what it stands for, napalm. So here we're looking at an RV explosion, and the crisis actor comes out in a napalm death shirt. And the RV explosion, we've correlated with the Nashville, Tennessee RV explosion. But let me play this clip so you can hear what I'm trying to draw your attention to.
Ball as the RV goes up in flames, and you can see a man drop to the ground and roll. One neighbor says it was like a scene out of a movie. A
scene out of a movie. Okay. Now here is another scene. This is from July 4th, where you had four people attacked by a shark. And of course, this is what happened in Jaws. It was a July 4th shark attack movie.
It was very surreal. It was like nothing I'd seen before. It was like a movie or something. So.
And that was surreal. It's like something you've never seen before. It's like something out of a movie. Interesting way to explain it. It's like something out of a movie. So what does that mean? It's so real it's fake? It must be real because it looks so fake. And you see these big happy faces. Yeah, my calf just got chomped off by a shark, LOL. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm not buying this. Completely normal to be smiling and laughing after you get your leg bitten off. It's just like a movie. Just like special effects. I'm pretty sure it's a psyop. You just got to figure out what the agenda is. What's the agenda behind fake shark attacks? Probably some climate change connected thing. That would be my guess. Have a lot more to get to tomorrow, which is fine. We have plenty of time tomorrow. I'm working on a documentary. I have to get some work done on that as well. But thanks for all the comments and chats, and we'll see you all then. This is AutoHoax or GTFO.